I'm Sandy Margulies, Justice with the First District Court of Appeal, and I'm here today to conduct a legacy interview of Justice Ignacio, also known as Nace Ruvolo, who recently retired from the Court of Appeal. So I'd like to start out and just briefly ask you some information about your background and family. So why don't we start out with something easy? Where were you born?
All right. I was born in a town called Elizabeth, New Jersey. It was in Union County. It's about 25, 30 miles outside of New York City.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about your parents?
Okay. I came from a very blue-collar family. My father worked in an umbrella factory. He started as a stock person, and he moved up to be the foreman for the production of this factory before he retired. My mother raised 4 children, including myself, and during that time she would do piecework that my father would bring her home in her spare time. She would sew the tips on umbrellas. Back in those days, it wasn't quite as automated as it is today. And she would get paid per umbrella for doing that. After we were old enough to take care of ourselves, she went and became a bookkeeper for A&P, which was a supermarket chain. That's
right, I remember A&P.
Yeah, on the East Coast. And she did very well. My mother was the salutatorian of her high school class, but didn't go to college. Came from a poor family. My grandparents all emigrated here from Italy.
Which part of Italy?
My father's family came from Sicily, Ribera, and my mother's family came from Calabria. And they met here, and my mother grew up in Pennsylvania, and my father met her around the time of the Second World War. And that was that.
Now, do you know how they met?
I don't remember how they met. Oh, yes, I do. My mother's sister worked at the umbrella factory and mentioned my mother to my father one day and said, "Hey, I'd like to fix you up with my sister." And that's how, because she was coming down to visit from Pennsylvania, and that's how they arranged it. Yeah.
So you had 3 siblings?
I do.
And their names?
It's Paula, Angela, and Peter. Now, we're all named for our grandparents. I was the firstborn of the firstborn, so I got grandfather Ignacio's name. But Peter is my mother's father's name, and Paula, who's the eldest, was my father's mother's name, and Angela was my mother's name.
So where are your siblings located?
Okay, my sister Paula is now living in Fort Myers, Florida, and she now occupies her time in putting on, directing plays, community plays. She was an actress and a singer for a number of years after she retired, early retirement, but now she's in production only. My sister Angela lives in Toms River, New Jersey, which is a beach community in the New Jersey shore, and she's retired and living in a little over 55 community. My brother, who was a high school teacher his whole career, lives up in Pennsylvania, in eastern Pennsylvania, near Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Now, your sister who lives on the Jersey shores,
yes.
Did she work outside the home?
For a time she did. She worked in a bank. She was a bank teller for a while. And Paula, I don't think did. The one in Florida. I don't think she worked. Oh yes, of course, yes she did. She worked for a while for a probate firm as a paralegal.
Oh, interesting.
For a number of years. That's right.
Now, your brother,
yes,
who lives in Pennsylvania.
Right.
What subject did he teach?
English. High school English.
High school English.
Yeah.
And did he ever describe his experiences to you?
A little bit, not too often. I mean, he would, talk sometimes about the books he was or asking the children to read. But no, he didn't have a lot of tales out of school, so to speak.
Now, you have some children.
I do. I have
And
two.
they are?
Michael and Sarah.
And how old are Michael and Sarah?
Michael's 42 and Sarah's 41. Michael lives in San Diego, right on the Los Gatos border. He's a biologist. Both of my children were biologists, are biologists.
Which is really interesting that
biologists.
they're oriented towards the sciences.
Right, exactly.
Were you a science major in college?
No, not at all. Science and math were my worst subjects.
Yes, I understand, actually.
Right, but my children did well, and they were not interested in law or history. I was a history major, none of that. But he's in a biotech firm, and Sarah lives up in Concord, California, and she's a middle school teacher.
Now, do you have any
in science.
grandchildren?
I do.
How old?
Ryan is the eldest. He's 14. He's also an engineering science person.
Oriented.
Right. And then I've got Lauren, who's 9. And I have Caitlin, Caitlin is the same age as Lauren, so she's 9 also. And then her brother Sean is, how old is he? 7 maybe.
So you've got a brood there. Quite a brood of grandchildren.
Well, we have a few from Barbara too.
Right. Well, I'm going to get to
Okay,
Barbara,
all
so
right.
that's a good segue. So you are married to the fabulous Barbara, or Barb,
Yeah, I am.
who I like a lot, as you know.
I do.
And I believe you two met at Rossmore.
We did. Barbara was the president of a club there called the Published Writers of Rossmore, and I was a member because I was in the process of publishing a novel, a piece of fiction that I wrote. Of course, lawyers have said I've been writing fiction for 25 years here on the bench. But anyway, we met there at club meetings and started dating.
So how long did you go out for before you got married?
We were together for a year, almost a year and a half before our wedding.
And if I'm not mistaken, Barb has gotten you into singing.
Yes, we had rehearsal yesterday afternoon, as a matter of fact. This community where we live is 55 and older. There are more than 200 clubs, and the Published Writers is one of them. And another club that I joined is called the Ashmolean Singers. We put on 3 concerts a year. Actually, there are 2 performances of each concert, so there's 6 performances each year. And our cabaret concerts are coming up later this month. The golden age of television. It's all theme songs and ads.
From TV shows? Yeah. Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Can you give me some idea of some of the TV
Oh, Gilligan's
shows?
Island, Bonanza, American Bandstand.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a solo on the Petticoat Junction theme.
Well, I'm dating myself, but I'm quite familiar with all of
I'm
those
sure you
shows
are.
that you just mentioned. And I think you're golfing, is that right?
I do some golfing, I do. I'm not terribly good at it, but that's because I don't have a steady program. I'm an episodic golfer.
And where do you normally golf?
Right there at Rossmore, where I live.
Oh, they have a golf course.
They have 2. They have
Very
an
nice.
18-hole and a 9-hole.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Do you have a handicap?
Yeah, but I'm not going to put it on camera. It's too high to...
So I want to go a little bit backtrack,
Sure.
talk about your educational background.
Okay.
So I assume you went to high school in New Jersey.
I did. I went to Rahway High School. That's the town. I was born in Elizabeth, and then when I was 5 years old, we moved to a house in Rahway, which was about 6 or 7 miles from Elizabeth, still in Union County.
Now, how big was the high school?
We had about I think it was probably 700 students.
Oh, so not that big.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that. It wasn't huge, but yeah, about 700.
And did you focus on any activities in high school?
I did. I was on the football team for a couple of years, and then I didn't want to do that anymore. So then I moved over to track and field, and I worked in the I did that sport, and I was the student council president in my senior year, and I joined a club called the Key Club. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar.
You've heard of them?
Oh, yeah.
I was a Key Club member.
Yeah, that's a lot of volunteer work, if I remember correctly.
Exactly.
And what were your events in track and field?
I was a shot putter.
You were a shot putter?
Yeah, I was. I was bigger then. Big for my age, let's put it that way.
And after high school, you went to Rutgers.
I did.
Now, did you select Rutgers because it was in New Jersey, or?
Yeah, partially that. It was, again, my family didn't have a lot of money, and Rutgers had in-state tuition, so it was a good place to go if you didn't have a lot of money. It was nearby. It was only about 30 miles, 35 miles from Rahway, so I could come back and see my family whenever I wanted to, but it was far enough away so that I lived on campus.
So you did live on campus in the dorms?
I did, yeah.
What was your major?
History.
Any particular area of history?
I had about 4 classes dealing with English history. I liked, our law evolved from English, from the English model, and that was, there were a lot of cultural things that we got from the UK. So I kind of liked it. To me, it was like pre-American history. So I just enjoyed it.
Now, did you go immediately from undergrad to law school?
I did. Yes, I left New Jersey 2 weeks after my graduation from Rutgers. It was a time, back in the late 60s, and the mamas and the papas and the Beach Boys were kind of, in control of youth culture. And I heard the siren call to come to California.
Well, that was my next question. Why California?
Oh, it was, why not? It's the Golden State, the beaches and warm weather and palm trees, and that was one of the reasons I went to law school in Southern California, because I didn't know that much about about Northern California, and I was in a fraternity, and a couple of my fraternity brothers were out here in summer of '68, and that changed them. And they came back, and I said, oh, you know what? I don't want to undergo a change like that, right now. I want to move on with my education and so on. So I decided that I would focus on schools in Southern California. And I didn't want to go to LA either, because I knew it was going to be a mass place. That's why I chose geographically that my first decision was I wanted to go to San Diego. And then I looked at the schools, and there weren't a lot of choices. No. So back at the time. So I went, there wasn't even a school in Irvine back then.
Now I'm just going to backtrack just a little bit. I heard you say you were in a fraternity. Which fraternity were you
Alpha
in?
Chi Rho.
Alpha Chi Rho?
Alpha Chi Rho, it was a small national fraternity. They only had about maybe 30 chapters, and they only had one out here, and they had a chapter at Cal, and that I had nobody out here. So what I did was I drove out, I arranged to stay there for the summer, to
at
board
Cal.
there. Yeah, at the fraternity chapter at Cal. So I came out here, and I arrived here like a week or 2 after the People's Park demonstrations.
Oh, timing is everything.
It was a pretty crazy time to be in Berkeley. But I stayed there, and I worked at the Del Monte Cannery which was then in Oakland.
Yes.
I was on the night shift, and I would come back to the fraternity house to go to bed, and I'd get into bed, and I could hear the campanile, and I still remember to this day hearing "Hey Jude" in the campanile, at 7 a.m. as I was crawling into bed. But I enjoyed it a lot. When I went then at the end of the summer, down to San Diego to start.
So you went to the University of San Diego Law School?
Correct.
Okay, so
Yeah.
when you went down at the end of the summer.
I went down at the end of the summer, and it was, I loved it. It was everything that I had envisioned, except I realized that I liked it better up here. Because I don't know. I mean, I made the wrong geographic decision. I mean, how wrong can San Diego be back in the
Beautiful
late 60s,
place.
early 70s? It was wonderful. I mean, the beaches were great, and there was, you know, my tennis game improved immensely from the time I was there, and that's where I started playing golf too, and a lot of beach time. But I liked the culture up here.
It's
It
a
was
different-
more
different
refined.
vibe.
It was- Pardon?
Different vibe.
Definitely a different vibe. More theater, more the music scene, concerts. You know, non-rock and roll stuff was here. It was just the food was better. The restaurants were better. The buildings were older. You know, San Diego at that time was very much in transition. It was there were a lot of retired people in Navy back then, military. Marines as well, but and schools, but not a lot of industry, not a lot of businesses. And it was in the time I was there, businesses started, you know, moving into the San Diego area, and there was a boom, a building boom that began and has continued, you know, even up to today. I go down there. I was down in San Diego a few months ago, and it's almost unrecognizable from when I was there in the early 70s.
Well, do you remember that on Coronado Island, the only thing there was the Coronado Hotel?
I know.
And now it's all different.
I know. Well, I haven't been on Coronado Island. I worked one summer as a beach attendant for the Coronado Beach. And we would go over to the hotel once in a while,
Yeah,
and the chart house, which was there.
Oh, yes, I love the chart house. So how would you describe your experience at law school?
I changed a lot. I was kind of a cut up in college, you know. I'm an extrovert, and I was just really, you know, totally into the social thing when I wasn't doing my work. But when I got to law school, I really got into the law. I loved the logic of it. That's why I went. I thought I would really enjoy the thought process of law, and I did. And I buckled down and studied my first year quite a bit, and did very well. In part, I was just attracted to the thought process and learning the principles of law and solving legal problems.
Well, you were on Law Review, right?
I was, yeah. I was on Law Review my second year, and then I was the editor-in-chief my third year of the Law Review.
And I didn't ask you a real basic question. What led you to go to law school?
Well, I alluded to the thought process that I knew existed in the law. Of course, logic applies to a lot of different disciplines, but I was no good in science. So,
As I said, I understand.
right.
that.
So logic and science was, you know, was a no go for me. So I thought law would be a good substitute, and it's also steeped in history. So
True.
that was consistent with my background as well.
Now, you have an advanced law degree from the University of Virginia.
I do. I went there after I was on this court, when I was in Division II. Back in those days, the UVA Law School had a program every few years that they would have justices from around the country come there and take courses for 2 summers, the entire summer, and then you take your exams. It was pass fail,
Thank goodness.
and write a thesis, and there were people from everywhere. We had actually my class. I can tell you who we had. We had
Janice Brown was there from the Supreme Court.
Of California.
From California. These are all justices. And Eileen Moore. And Aronson, Rich Aronson.
Oh, Rich Aronson.
Yeah, and Patty Kitching was in my class. And Connie Callahan.
Boy, that was a pretty sizable group from California.
Yeah, we had 5 or 6 people, I think, including myself. And then, but the class size was about 35. But we had the biggest group statewide there. And it was great. We had great teachers. Pam Carlin came out from Stanford and taught a con law class. And we had great teachers. And
now, what was your thesis about?
my thesis, funny you should ask that.
Oh, you brought it. There it is, on camera.
Yeah, it's not
in
for sale.
the San Diego Law Review.
It's San Diego. Yeah, after I wrote my thesis, I decided that I would submit it to my alma mater for publication, and they took it. The thesis is Appellate Mediation: Settling the Last Frontier of ADR. Back in those days, I was the head of our mediation program here at the First District, and so I had a lot of data. Back when we started the program, it was Bob Dosey and Barbara Jones and I were on the original committee, and we went around and studied programs in Oregon and the Ninth Circuit and a few other. Hawaii we didn't go to Hawaii. To see how they ran their programs, and then we came up with a model that would work for us. So this article talks about those years, that is the formative years, and what other programs we looked at, and what elements of the programs we had adopted for ourselves. And then it also talks about the first 3 or 4 years of production that we had in mediation and our results and what kind of cases did well. Excuse me a second. So yeah, so I published that one back. That was my thesis.
So while you were in law school,
Yes.
did you have any thoughts about eventually joining the judiciary? Was that in your radar?
No. I knew, the only thing I knew in law school was that I wanted to do litigation. And I wanted to do civil litigation. That's as far as I got with my my thought process.
So what brought you to the conclusion that you wanted to do civil litigation?
I just enjoyed the civil problems. I thought that although some criminal problems can be complex and weighty, that as a whole, I thought the civil jurisprudence was a little bit more complicated and took more thought to wade through it. And I liked that. I loved writing already. I mean, I published a couple articles in the Law Review. Yeah, I just decided civil was the way to go, and that's how I transitioned to my first job.
So you took the bar exam in California.
I took the bar exam. What happened was, after my first year, I wanted, and I did very well in law school, and I wanted to transfer up here to Bolt. And I asked the dean about it, and the dean said that we usually have some students transfer almost every class. But that year, that would have been 1970, they were holding places for students that had been drafted out of law school. So they had to hold in the 60s. So they had to hold those places available for the people who were being discharged back out so that they can re-enter law school. So that year, Bolt didn't take any of the any transfers from outside of that group. So I didn't get to transfer, which was okay. I mean, I loved San Diego, but.
So you took the bar.
I took the bar before I left. I went. The editor in chief before me is Pete Bowie. Was Pete Bowie. Pete
is just retired. He's the chief bankruptcy judge down in San Diego. But Pete was at Justice, in Main Justice in Washington. And he was in the civil division in the tort section. And he said, Nace, you'll love it. Come out here, you're going to get more responsibility than any new graduate can get on this job. You're going to be trying cases. We have a really smart bunch of people here working, and you'll love it. So I applied for the honors program, which meant that I could enter the Justice Department, the federal government, at a higher GS level than if I just had my law degree. And I applied, and gosh, I made $11,000 that first year. I mean, it was, spectacular.
I know, it's interesting because when I first started out in the Alameda County DA's office, I started at $16,000, and I thought that was terrific.
Right.
And it's all changed now.
Yeah. It was reasonably competitive for a couple years back in those days, so they were able to get some good people. But I went back.
So you went to Justice.
I went to Justice, Main Justice.
Department.
Yeah. I got back there and went in our little library area, and everybody's sitting around watching TV. I said, "What are you doing watching TV?" And it was the Watergate hearings, something that's hard to avoid.
So it was a really exciting time to be back there.
It was a very exciting time to be back there. And then after my first year that I worked there, I was there for 4.5 years.
Right.
After my first, I think it was after my first year, it could have been my second year. My boss called me in, and he says, James St. Clair is looking for some, really high achieving young lawyers to come on over to the president's legal staff to help with this Watergate business. Would you like to go for an interview?
Right.
And I said, no way. I said, I know what's going to happen. They're going to, lock up the young lawyers in the law libraries, and we're going to be researching executive privilege and all these other, constitutional questions that Sinclair had to deal with as the president's lawyer, as opposed to going around the country and trying cases everywhere. So that was not a good career move.
That was
for
a
me.
smart move.
I know.
Very smart. So what kinds of cases did you handle?
They were all tort cases. They were all cases where the government was sued for negligence. Like California, we had the Federal Tort Claims Act, which governed what kinds of cases and liability the government had and what defenses they had. As a matter of fact, the California Tort Liability Act is modeled after the federal system. So that's what I did, and I had all kinds of cases. I had everything from a slip and fall in front of a little tiny post office in Albany, Georgia, that I tried, up to mine disasters in Kentucky and the Sunshine Silver Mine disaster. I was the lead counsel for that, where it was the largest, at the time, it was the largest non-coal mine disaster in American history. It was in Idaho. Kellogg, Idaho was the mine.
So you were traveling to different places and staying there for periods of time.
Correct, for depositions and witness meetings and document productions and so on.
So when you were doing litigation in the U.S. Justice Department, was the extent of discovery as involved as it is now? Was it as extensive?
We had to produce a lot of documents and witnesses. I want to say that the hostility, the combativeness of civil litigation when I came back when I came to private, it wasn't like that. The lawyers got along much better, particularly on the big cases that I handled, because we were together a lot. So we had a lot of mutual respect for each other, and even in the small cases, we just got done what we needed to get done.
In justice.
Correct. Yeah, for example, I tried a case in Oklahoma City where the El Reno Reformatory, they had a riot, and the corrections people put everybody on lockdown for a couple days, and they thought that everybody was calm. They went out and they talked to the various groups, and they thought everything was calm. And so they went back to general population. You can only keep people segregated
That is correct.
for so long because of the problems that creates. So they said, okay, we're going to get back to general population. And a couple hours after they started that, the victim was walking to the laundry room with his laundry, and another prisoner came up to him and stabbed him. So his wife sued for wrongful death, and I tried that case in Oklahoma City. That's the kind of cases we had.
So at some point, you decided to leave the Justice Department in D.C. and enter private practice.
Correct. Back to the Bay Area.
Yes, back to the Bay Area. You
Yeah.
got yourself back to the Bay Area.
I did. Even then, that was in '77. I left Justice. Even then, the San Diego area industry and commerce was still developing. And so the law practice was much more provincial. Civil law practice down there was much more provincial than it was up here. So to me, not only was I going to get good, bigger cases, more mature business and industry up here, but also I got back to the Bay Area that I loved.
So you joined the firm of?
Bronson and McKinnon, which was then one of the biggest firms in San Francisco, civil firms. They were looking for someone to come in with my experience, because they had a couple senior partners who needed somebody. Basically, they were the generals and I was the lieutenant, and I would go out and do the discovery and the prep work and workup.
Now, I should ask you, what drew you away from the Justice Department to private practice?
Okay, I wanted to come back to the West. I didn't want to. I mean, first of all, I was married, and I was on the road 90 days a year.
That's a lot.
So I couldn't stay at the tort section forever. So it was time, and I was told that between 3 and 5 years was the right amount of time to develop the experience that had the most marketability if you were going to go back into the private sector. So I did that, and so I decided I was going to come back here. I was already a member of the bar, and wanted to join a civil firm, keep doing similar work, not necessarily the same, because you wouldn't be representing the government very much. And so I came out here and I interviewed and took the job at Bronson.
So that segues into my next question.
Yeah.
What areas of law did you specialize in when you were in private practice?
All right, I was in private practice at Bronson for 17 years, from the time I came back in '77 until '94, January, when I was put on the Superior Court. And during that time, I was lucky. It was a time when lawyers were starting to specialize, but fortunately, I worked for a number of different partners who had different practices. So I got experience in many areas: franchise litigation, construction litigation. I did a lot of construction litigation. Did some tort work, some tort defense work, but I also did some plaintiff's work. Commercial, I did a couple intellectual property cases. You name it, it all kind of, legal malpractice defense. I did a lot of legal malpractice defense because I was very involved in legal ethics activities.
Now, how big was the firm?
The firm back then was about 140, which by today's standards is not big, but it was among the top, 10 or 12 in size in the Bay Area then.
So when did you become a partner?
1983. I was given it was an 8-year line to get to be a partner from beginning to your first eligibility for partnership. But I got a couple years credit they gave me for the time I was at Justice. So it shortened it, but it was still 5 years.
So while you were out in private practice, did you get involved in other activities or committees or bar associations?
I was very, very active in the local and state bar. I started, probably my focus was on legal ethics, and I joined the San Francisco Legal Ethics Committee in '79, 2 years after
Bar
I started.
Association in San
Yeah,
Francisco.
Bar Association, San Francisco Legal Ethics Committee in 1979, 2 years after I started at Bronson. And I worked with them until I became the chair of that committee, and even beyond. But then I wanted to branch out and go for the state, because the state bar really, had a much broader scope. So, so I applied for the COPRAC, the Committee on Professional Responsibility and Conduct of the state bar, and I got on that. So I transitioned away from the local because I didn't have the time to do both. So I transitioned to the state bar COPRAC committee, and I was on that committee for 4 or 5 years, and then I was the chair of that.
Now, you were also president of the Contra Costa Bar Association, is that correct?
No, I was the president of the legal ethics. What happened was, after the earthquake in '89, you want me to hold on here? But I moved. Bronson had an office in Walnut Creek, and I was living out in that area in Contra Costa County. After the '89 earthquake and the shutting of the Bay Bridge down for those months, I decided that I would at least camp out at Bronson's Walnut Creek office and do my work out there.
And see how it went.
Yeah, and my secretary also lived in Walnut Creek. So it was, it was pretty handy. So she loved that. So she came out as well, and we didn't have to deal with the commute, the damaged commute. Then what happened was the managing partner at that office retired, and so the management of Bronson here asked me to stay and become the managing partner of the Walnut Creek office, which I did, and that was '90 or '91 that I became the managing partner, and I held that position until I became a judge, until '94.
So at some point, your thoughts went to becoming a judge.
Right.
Do you know when that was?
It was not that long before I applied. It was probably '93, something like that, sometime like a year before I got appointed. I just thought, okay, I was trying to take a look at my long-range plan. Here I was a pretty relatively high up by then partner in a major law firm in the Bay Area. I thought, okay, what more am I going to do? I'm now in Walnut Creek, which was fine. And as I said earlier, then I got involved with the Contra Costa Bar and their legal ethics. I brought to them the opportunity to have legal ethics expertise to enrich that bar activity that they needed. But anyway, I started looking around and I thought, you know what, it's time for me to think about my next step. And the next step, I wanted to stay in litigation. And to me, it was just a natural transition to go from being a lawyer, a litigator, and a trial lawyer to being a trial judge. And I talked to some people about it, and they thought I would be a very good candidate for the judiciary. And so I put my name in.
And you became a judge in 1994.
Correct, January.
And which governor appointed you to the
Pete
bench?
Wilson.
And that was to Contra Costa Superior Court.
Right. I never met Wilson. Actually, that's not 100% accurate. I met him once sometime in the '90s. It was before I came here. So it was that first few years, and there was a big campaign, state campaign. Maybe it was early '96.
Okay.
I met him at a fundraiser in Contra Costa County, and there was the big line of people, and we were all shaking hands. And I wanted to meet him and thank him for what he had done for me. So, and he was right in front of the band. So just as I got up to him to thank him, the band cranked up. and there was no way he could hear me. And I had my whole thing, Governor, it's so glad to meet you. You changed my life. The usual commentary that one in that position goes through. But I'm sure he did. He just smiled at me and shook my hand.
But
and
the
moved on to the
bad
next one.
interfered with your big opportunity.
So that was my chance to meet Pete Wilson.
So how long were you on Contra Costa Superior Court?
I was on that court for just about 3 years, 2 years and 11 months.
And what were your assignments?
My first year, I was okay. So this is how this happened. So I got appointed, and I went over, and Doug Swagger,
right, our friend Doug Swagger,
right, who was in this division, he was the PJ at Contra Costa the year I got appointed. I heard
many stories about his experiences as PJ at Contra Costa.
Oh yeah,
County.
I'm sure he had a lot of them.
Yes.
So I went over as a courtesy to meet him and introduce myself to him because I didn't really know him. Excuse me. And I said, it was now January, so the assignments had just started for the new year. And I said, where are you going to stick me now? He says, well, I I can put you in felony trials. I said, okay. So
with your extensive criminal law
no
background.
I know. So I went home and I called Seeger here in the city, and I said, send me everything you've got on that you use for orientation on criminal law. So a few days later, I come back from work, trying to clear up my work at Bronson, and there's a big package on the front steps of the house, and I opened it up. Of course, back in those days, it was all video cassettes, big video cassettes, and a lot of writing and so on. I watched the videos, and I read who was the guy that had the sentencing handbook?
Ryan.
Yeah, right. So I read, I was reading that. Of course, I kept a copy of that on my bench because...
it was a good handbook.
Very good, very good. So I was ready to go. And that was, when was that? That was January. Okay, I was appointed on January 6th, and I was sworn in on the 21st. So I only had a couple weeks to get up and running and close out my practice at Bronson, which is a pretty short time. But I did it, and I started on the 21st of January in a felony department.
Now, do you remember what your first felony trial was?
I don't. What I do remember is that the three strikes law had just been passed, and became effective the beginning of 94. And I had the second three strikes case that was tried in our county. And the public defender himself tried that case. So it was a pretty notable event for me. I don't remember my first jury trial. I'm sure that I had some small ones in the beginning. Although I do remember early in that time, we were picking a jury, and one of the defense lawyers said, Your Honor, I'd like to make a Batson motion. So I said, okay, it's time for a break, and when we get back, we'll take up your motion. So we took a break, and I ran to the phone, and I called Marciano up. This is another justice from this division.
Who was on Contra Costa Superior Court.
He was on Contra Costa Superior Court, and then was the PJ of your division. So I called him. I said, Jim, what the heck is a Batson motion? Because it never, those things don't come up in civil. I mean, a couple times, but never in my cases. So he explained it to me, and we went back and picked up from there. But it's all a learning process.
Yes, I remember those experiences. My first one was, I was sent an unlawful detainer, and it was a Section 8, and I didn't know anything about Section 8, and I did the same thing. I got on the phone with Peggy Horan. I said, what do I do?
Yeah.
So did you have any other assignments besides felony trials?
I did. I had 1 year of felony trials, and then they had a vacancy in the civil. And Ellen James was the supervising judge of the civil in Contra Costa, and she wanted me to come over. And Doug said I could. So I went over, and back then we had what was it called? The civil, it was the civil trial.
Direct calendaring?
Yeah,
or-
it was a direct calendaring system. There was a name for the program, and I've forgotten it. I can't remember it right now. But we had 4 departments dedicated to civil, and we had a direct calendaring system. There was a pilot program back then for the state to see if direct calendaring was an answer to the surge in cases that were being filed. And I did that for 2 years, or almost 2 years. And then I got my appointment.
So what prompted you to apply to the Court of Appeal?
Okay, I got a call from, I won't mention the name of the justice because I've never publicly mentioned the justice's name, but I got a call from a justice on this court who asked me, Nace, have you ever thought about the Court of Appeal? And I said, not really. I've only been here, back then it was like 2.5 years. 2.5 years, so I thought I'd stay here a little longer. And the justice's response was, well, we all have our time, and this is your time. There's a vacancy in Division 2, and we think you would be a good person to take that position. And I was encouraged to put in my name, and I did. And that was, I think it was like in May that I got this call, May of 96. And I went through the process, and by December, I was appointed.
Oh, very quickly. That's very quickly by today's
very
standards.
quick. It was very quick. And actually, I was, it was early December that Barb BJ and I, we were confirmed the same day by the commission. She was an hour. She said, "I have seniority over you." She always tells me that because she's an hour more, because she had her hearing first that day. We joke about it.
Just to backtrack.
Sure.
Did you find it difficult to transition from private practice to the trial court?
Fortunately, not that much. I mean, I came and right away I went to NJO, which
New Judges Orientation.
Yeah, New Judges Orientation, which is a fantastic program. It was very well developed even back in the 90s, and that really helped. The only thing I had to stop doing is trying to overthink what the lawyers were doing. Gosh, why are they doing it that way?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have asked that question, or why not? Why not emphasize this? I didn't talk to the lawyers about it, but I would intellectualize it for a while, and then I realized, hey, look, they know. I only know 10% of what they know about their case, so give that up. And I did, and I stopped doing that pretty early on in my time.
So who nominated you to the Court of Appeal? Which governor?
It was Wilson again. Wilson nominated me, and he had a lot of, back then, he had a lot of appointees here, or nominees that were already on this court. So
you came on the Court of Appeal in 1996, is that right?
Yes.
And
December 8, something like that. Barbara and I got.
So, did you find it difficult to transition over here?
It was different. As I said earlier, that I love writing and doing legal research. Yeah. So this was really. It didn't take me long to realize that, despite my love for the courtroom, this was even a better fit for me. As you know from your years in the trial court, is very fast paced. It's all shoot from the hip. There's not a lot of time for thought process that you have. You don't do a lot of writing. It's all oral.
Ruling from the bench.
Yeah, ruling from the bench. We did have research attorneys help us a little bit, although I did most of my own law in motion. I had Tuesdays, law in motion the day was Tuesday, and I would come in on Monday and get those tentative rulings out. And I did most of that work myself. But Transitioning here, it was quiet, very quiet.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, very quiet. That was hard to get. But see, if you're going to do work, at your desk or in a law library, it's got to be quiet so you're not distracted. But I missed the excitement of the courtroom and the courthouse. We had good staff over in Contra Costa as well as the people here. So much better resources here, though.
And you get time to think.
You have time to think. I mean, as I said early on in my career here, that if I get it wrong, I have nobody else to blame but myself, because we've got all the time in the world to make the right decision.
So who were your colleagues in Division II?
Okay. Well, I was put in Division II. So Tony Klein was the PJ then, and Jim Lamden was there, and Paul Harley, and I was with them as a group until '06 when I was put as PJ of Division IV. So we worked together for almost 10 years in Division II. And it was,
how would you generally describe that experience?
It was fantastic. Tony was a great mentor. I mean, despite his idiosyncrasies, I adored the guy. And he was totally intellectually involved in the work. Yeah. I remember the first case that I wrote myself that we were going to publish, People versus Allen. And he walked in, I circulated the case, and he came into my chambers, walked right up to my desk. I said, "Hey, Tony, what's going on?" And he had the draft in his hand, and he flipped it on my desk, and he says, "That draft is analytically flawed." I said, "Okay, let's sit down. Let's talk about it."
Well, he certainly wasn't subtle about it.
No, but he was very upfront about his feelings, and I know that he wasn't trying to hurt my feelings about it.
It's him.
He was just there. Anyway, we ended up. He dissented in that case. I can't remember whether it was Paul or Jim who went with me on it, but the Supreme Court took it. It was a kidnapping case.
What was the issue?
Is there a minimum distance?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, minimum distance for a kidnapping. And we wrote that it was that distance was not the only criteria, that it was also whether the person had been moved to a more dangerous location. And in this case, they had. And so we affirmed the conviction. Supreme Court took the case and then affirmed us.
Yes, you were affirmed.
Yeah. But anyway, I loved it up in two. It was quite a good experience.
So why did you decide to apply to be presiding justice of Division IV?
Just like when I decided that, I was going to, go to justice and leave justice. I mean, it was a career thing. It's kind of like, okay, I could do this. I've been on the court now for about 10 years. That's an opportunity for me to get into the administration of the court and do more and use my experience to help further where the court is going. And so I put my name in.
And you became presiding justice?
I became the presiding justice of Division IV.
And which governor?
That was Schwarzenegger.
That was Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, who
okay.
I never met him either. So.
You're 0 for 0.
Yeah, I know.
Or 0 for 2, I guess. 0 for 2.
Over 3.
So how did it differ being presiding justice?
We had a different crew. Back when I was there, it was Tim and Pat Sepulveda and Maria.
So Tim Reardon, Pat Sepulveda, and Maria
Rivera. Right, were there when I got over there, and it was a different group. Pat and Tim were very conservative on the criminals work in particular, and we didn't quite have that bent, that philosophy, if you will.
In Division II.
In Division II,
Right.
It was more moderate. But I got along. I enjoyed working with all my new colleagues. Tim was a dear, and Maria too. And then Pat retired. Pat Sepulveda retired, gosh,
I should know when.
5 years, 6 years ago?
Yeah, 5 or 6 years ago.
And then we had the whole, the cart of the rotation of pro tems, and then, Jim Humes was appointed, and he lasted a year, and then he came here as PJ, and we had more pro tems. So it started. We had more personnel changes than we did in two.
So by the time you retired,
Right.
it was you, Tim Reardon, John Streeter.
John Streeter and Maria had just left.
Just left.
So yeah, so we
you had a pro tem
Ethan.
again.
Ethan
Oh,
came
Ethan.
over from the city,
Right.
to sit pro tem in her chambers when I left. So Ethan was still there when I left.
So how'd you enjoy your experience or not enjoy it?
I loved it. I loved the work on the Court of Appeal was fantastic. I love writing. I wrote a lot of cases myself. Of course, I had the help of two really good researchers.
Yeah,
I had good people.
had excellent research.
Yeah, I did. Even as they retired, I was lucky. I got new ones who were
You
just
always
as
had
good.
excellent research attorneys.
And they would have, I always had them review the stuff that I wrote from scratch.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yeah, and it's helpful. In the beginning, they're not that critical, but then as they get to know you better and realize you're not going to bite their head off if they say they don't like this or that, they're more outspoken. I enjoyed that.
So what cases and or achievements are you most proud of as an appellate justice?
Okay, well, can I look at my note? Let's see. Okay, I had a lot of, the Allen case was a great way to start.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah. And I had a couple good divorce cases. In re Marriage of Hinman was an important one that allowed the allocation of income to an unemployed supported spouse. Okay, if he or she had the ability to work, then the court could impute income to them for purposes of. Did you sit in family law?
I didn't, but I understand the significance of that case.
Yeah. Anyway, that was one of my early cases. That and Allen, those were two cases I decided very early on that I remember. The other marriage case was in re Marriage of Barry Bonds.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that you had that case.
Yeah.
Yes.
We had that case in Division 2, and they had a prenup, and whether the prenup was enforceable or not. And Lambden wrote that.
Yes,
and said,
I remember.
Yeah, and said that it was not enforceable for a number of reasons, that it was coercive and this and that. And and Tony went with him. And then I wrote a dissent and said, no, under the Uniform Marital Relations Act, this meets all the criteria, and it wasn't required that son, Bonds, the spouse, had to have a lawyer at the meeting at which time this was discussed. So anyway, so I dissented in that case. It went up, and the Supreme Court took it, right, and they reversed. But I didn't have the last laugh, because after the reversal, the legislature changed the uniform marital whatever it's
premarital
called.
agreement.
Right, settlement act, and it now said that there was if one of the spouses does not have a lawyer, it's presumed unfair, unless the one who did have a lawyer can show, under the circumstances, that it was not that there was no unfairness to it. So they changed the law. So that one really it was a lot of fun, but that didn't go anywhere. I had the case where there was a challenge to the high school exit exam.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, which was on the books until just a couple of years ago, last year or the year before, and it was being challenged by minority student groups who claim that it disadvantaged them. That if they had to take a uniform test in order to graduate, and it unfairly discriminated against them because they didn't have the same education ability and rights and opportunities that other students had, and so on. But we affirmed the exit exam and allowed it to go forward. So that was kind of a pretty big case. I've had a lot of big CEQA cases when I was here.
And those are complicated.
They are complicated. I had the Oakland Airport. This
Oh, you
tells
had
you
the
how old
Oakland
I
Airport?
am. Yeah,
Oh, boy.
the Oakland Airport, the new the international terminal. When they put that in, yeah, I mean it goes back a long time. It took a while for these cases to get up there, but I had that. Keep jets off the bay was the challenging.
Oh, I didn't know you had that one.
Yeah, that was it. Keep jets off the bay. That was out of your county. That was the Oakland Airport. I had the Chevron refinery in Contra Costa renovations. That was a big CEQA case. I had the development of Treasure Island. That's a new one. This just happened a couple of years ago, where we went ahead and passed the CEQA environmental impact conclusions to allow the Treasure Island development to go forward. I don't think it's started yet, but anyway, that's up to them and the federal government. I had a sand mining case in the Bay, and whether that required a CEQA pre-approval.
Oh, EIR.
Yeah, that was it. Actually, the Division 4 just filed a couple months ago a return to that it was the public trust doctrine. In addition to CEQA, we said no, CEQA doesn't apply, but the public trust doctrine does because the state owns the sand in the bay. And we sent it back down for the trial court to make a determination as to whether the public trust doctrine was being violated by the state giving the sands to a private commercial dredger who then took it and sold it for concrete, to be used in concrete. And it came back just recently, just a few months ago. It was reheard in 4, and they said no, there was not a public trust doctrine violation. So that was a good case. I had a big licensing case in that came out of Southern California, Medivation versus UC Regents. Medivation was a private company who worked with UC in helping them develop a cancer treatments for pancreatic cancer. So this is a big thing.
It's a big deal.
So the UC got the patents, and there was a big fight with Medivation over what the agreement had been. Had been with between the Medivation and the Regents as to the scope of the licensing that Medivation would have in order to manufacture these under these patents. And so we litigated that case. I was in Division 4 by then. That was a very interesting, big case. I had a case arising out of the Burning Man Festival.
Oh, yes. I'm familiar with Burning
Benanati
Man.
versus Rock City, I think it was called, the sponsor of the Burning Man Festival. And actually, it was kind of a new question, is whether assumption of the risk voluntary assumption of the risk applies in a non-sport context.
That's right.
And we said it does. What happened was he went up there to tribute a friend of his, which was a big part of the festival, and he walked through the bonfires to put the tribute on the bonfire, and he tripped and fell into the ashes, into the embers. And he sued the developer, the festival organizer, saying that they should have had more barriers around it. So we said, no, that's the voluntary assumption of the risk. Supreme Court took that one, and they affirmed as well. So that was an interesting case. I've had a number of cases challenging the enforceability of private arbitration clauses. So over the years, I've had I think four published cases dealing with private arbitration agreements. Anti-SLAPP, we all get anti-SLAPP. Criminal, the Allen case I mentioned. You'll know this case, Bellis versus Superior Court.
Yes.
I don't think you were involved in that case. This is a case where you had a local rule in your county that required post-trial the juror the juror information sheets that you give to the council had to be returned to the
Correct.
court.
I remember that case,
Okay.
and that was past my time on
Yeah,
Superior Court, but I remember when it was here.
Right. And we said that they did not have to return them. That was a violation of the constitutional rights of the public defender's
remember
office.
that.
So that was a big case in criminal law. Gosh, I don't know, how many more do you want me to go through?
Well, you know what I want to, I don't want to end this interview without talking about your contributions on the Commission on Judicial Performance.
Okay. Okay. But I just want to say, I published 180 published cases, and I wrote over 3,000. So
that's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's quite a few. But anyway.
So when did you become a member of the commission?
Okay, I became a member of the commission in 2013, and I was there for 5 years. I was made vice chair in 2016, and then I was made chair. I only served 1 year as chair, and that was from 2017 to last March, March of 2018, when I decided to retire.
So how would you describe your experience on the commission?
It was the most challenging thing that I've done as either a lawyer or a judge. And it's challenging because of the nature of the work.
And why don't you explain, for
okay,
the uninitiated watching this,
okay.
this video.
The commission is the Commission on Judicial Performance. And it's an 11-person commission made up of 3 judges, 2 lawyers, and 6 public members. And we are charged with reviewing complaints of misconduct against judges statewide and making investigations where appropriate, and then deciding whether there should be discipline imposed and what the level of discipline can be. And it could go anywhere from an advisory letter to a public admonishment to a censure to removal. The last couple require a public hearing before formal proceedings before we could either censure or remove judges or justices.
Had you ever participated as one of the panel judges in a
special
hearing?
master? No.
See, I've done that.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yes, so I was just curious if you had done it.
No, I hadn't. Anyway, so we get 1,200 to 1,300 complaints a year, and most of them come from litigants or friends of litigants or family members, and most of them are complaints about the result, about the fact that they lost. And we would always investigate, have an investigator contact them and say, well, why do you think the judge was unfair or engaged in misconduct? He said, well, because I lost the case. And I would say that 90% of the cases were resolved that way and for that reason. 10% of the cases we would go further and have much more extensive investigations. We had staff who do the investigations for us and then write up the results of their investigation and submit it to the commission. And we would
and much of your staff, they're attorneys.
They are. They're attorneys, and some of them are ex-DAs. They're used to doing this work. And then the commission we would decide every one, even the ones that I mentioned earlier that were summarily dismissed. We would get short summaries of those reports, those memoranda, relating to those, and then we would have a consent calendar where we would, does anybody disagree with the recommendation to close those? So we spent most of our time on the more serious complaints that we had. But there's a very strong understanding of the significance of that work, both on for the public safety and public good, as well as respecting the office, the discretionary elements of judicial office, and knowing that the reputation of the judges are at risk.
Are the majority of complaints related to demeanor?
The majority of the complaints for which discipline is imposed relate to demeanor. I would say yes, by far. We had a fair number of election campaigning issues, but I would say that and some that deal with conflicts of interest and the refusal to recuse and so on. But demeanor is by far the highest number. And I have to tell you what makes it additionally stressful is that there's very little understanding because it's all confidential.
Correct.
So the public has very little understanding and access to information about how we operate. And because of that, and because the high percentage of complaints that are dismissed, they are very cynical as to whether we are really doing the right job for the public good or whether we're just covering up for judges. And they use the numbers against us all the time. But
now, I think it should be clear that the majority of members of the commission now are not judges.
Correct. That's true, and we changed that some years ago, and we raised that to the public. But they think that that they're political hacks, or that they're not doing the job. Then on the other side, the judges, of course, disagree. Every time we want to discipline somebody,
they're not happy.
They're not happy.
Yeah.
So this is an operation that's so important to the integrity of the administration of justice in this state, but for which there is no pat on the back at all. So that makes it a very stressful event. And then, of course, my last year, we had the executive director retire. So I had to find a new Victoria Henley. So we had to replace her. So we had to, on top of all the work, we had to go through that process. And in addition, we were fighting with the state auditor that wanted to come in and audit. They're there now. They're upstairs right now.
Right, they're doing an audit.
Right, because we settled the lawsuit that we had won with them so that they would have access to the confidential records. And they changed the law so that access by the state auditor to CJP's records was not subject to the Public Records Act.
What are the auditors examining? I mean, are they looking at your statistics, or?
Well, they're beyond that. They're looking at. They told us they were not going to second guess. They just wanted to make sure that the process was working as well as it could, but without saying, why did you decide on public admonishment here when you could have, you should have removed him. They don't have the expertise to do that, and they promised they were not going to do that. They're still up there for another couple months, and then we'll see when their report gets issued, maybe later this year, if they're going to hold to that and what kind of recommendations they're going to make. But we'll see.
Now, as chair of the committee, did you find you had more responsibility, or was
yes.
it? Okay.
Especially with those added, in addition to helping move the work that we had to do and help put the agendas together and so on. I spent about a third of my time, my last year here, working on the commission. I was upstairs all the time.
time commitment.
big time. It was a couple hours every day.
So if you had any advice to give judges based on your experience on the commission, what would it be?
For most of them, keep doing what they're doing. I mean, I have great respect for virtually all of the justices that I've worked with, not only here, but also who I've met statewide in these various committees and commissions that I've been on, besides the CJP. You know, they're all dedicated. They're all trying to do the right thing. They're trying to come to the right conclusion. You know, I admire them. So keep doing what you're going to do. Don't get distracted, and stay calm.
So just to finish things off,
Sure.
Can you talk briefly about your teaching career at law school?
Okay. I taught at 3 separate law schools over the time that I've been a judge. I think I started after I became a judge. I first taught when I was out in Contra Costa at J.F. Kennedy School of Law, which was an unaccredited school, and it was night. It was people who were, you know, trying to transition out of whatever career they had or job they had and wanted to become lawyers and had to go take classes at night. And I taught professional responsibility, legal ethics, to them. And then I came back here. When I came here, I got on the Hastings faculty, adjunct faculty, and I taught probably 6 or 7 years. I taught a seminar. They were limited to 18 students, and they were most of them 2 Ls or 3 Ls, and it was on judicial process. But I taught it from the perspective of the bench, not I'm a lawyer and I'm going to tell you how to write a good brief. It was, I'm a judge and I want you to look at the briefs from the judge's perspective because that's your audience. And you read these briefs and you tell me, did you understand the problem? What would you have liked to have known more about it? Was it well written? Was it too snippy? Was it a distraction? And I tried to teach them from that perspective, how to write briefs, how to make oral arguments. We came here. I had one case that I had preserved on videotape. That was the case that they used for their final, and they wrote an opinion. That was their final. The first year or so, I tried to have them in panels of 3. The problem with that is it was a race to the bottom. And some of the students, if you had a law review person in that group, that law review person was going to do all the work because the other students were going to push it on them.
That is a problem with group projects.
I know it. So I stopped that after a year or two, and then everybody, and I said, okay, well, we're going to lose the collegial, the consensual judging part of this, but it has to go. So we stopped doing that, and they wrote their own briefs.
So,
Excuse me.
In the years
I said the third one.
Yes.
So I did that for about 6 to 8 years, and then at the end of my teaching, I taught at Golden Gate, and I went back to teaching legal ethics.
Legal
then.
ethics.
Yeah.
So in your years of teaching, did you see a change in law students, or anything different about them based on from when you started till when you finished up?
No, I mean, not really. I mean, they were, it was already when I started teaching, it was already a pretty diverse student body, student population. So there wasn't that much change. There were a lot of women in there. There were a lot of minorities in school.
Any change in attitude or
No,
approach?
it seemed to me that everybody was trying to do the best they could. The night students had the biggest challenge because
well, they're working during the day.
they're working during the day, and they, the entry requirements at JFK were lower, than certainly Hastings and,
Right.
and for Golden Gate as well. And so the students weren't that, academically oriented as the other schools were. So it was harder for them to do well.
And the last question I have is...
But we had some good ones there.
Pardon me?
But we had some good ones at JFK. But I'm saying just broadly, the student body.
So as my last question, I'd like to ask you, what was your judicial philosophy, and did it evolve or change over the years you were on the bench?
Okay. No, it did not. My judicial philosophy has always been do the right thing. And I mean that both in terms of come to the right decision, the decision that I think is the right decision for, and have it reasoned, a good reasoned decision, and also to present myself in a way that honors the judiciary and do the right thing in terms of my interactions with the lawyers, with the parties, with my colleagues, with staff. I worked here for, I'll just give you a little example. I was a judge for 24 years, and I never hugged anybody in my staff or who worked at the courts. I just had that, they knew that I liked them. They knew that I was, I had strong feelings for them, as proper feelings for them, having worked together as long as I did. But I just had that line that I wouldn't cross. I would not hug anybody. That's just kind of a anecdotal, point as to, just do what you think is the right thing vis-a-vis your ethics, your conduct, and your decision making.
So I want to thank you, Justice
My
Ruvolo,
pleasure.
for interviewing, and it was absolutely delightful.
I miss you. I miss my
miss
colleagues.
You too, but, it was an absolutely delightful interview. I learned some new things about you, and you're one fascinating person.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed being here. Good seeing you.
It was nice seeing you.
Right.